Hello and welcome back to the Co-Treat.
Hello.
I'm Jonathan, your occupational therapy professional.
And I'm Magnolia, your speech therapy professional.
So as you guys know, it's April. It's OT month. Woo, woo, woo.
Yay, OTs.
Woo. So we talked about, what is occupational therapy.
We did. I learned a lot.
We had a great time.
I hope people learned a lot, but I definitely learned a lot.
So. I was really proud of that episode.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was really like what I wanted if I were a student or if I were someone new. Like that's what I needed. So this week we thought, since it's still OT month in the theme of my OT takeover, what we were discussing, what is the history of occupational therapy?
Yeah.
Because I don't think people realize where we come from.
No, and we hinted on it a little bit whenever we talked about women's history.
Yes, we did.
You highlighted a few.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, pretty much all I've ever learned about OT month history stuff.
Yeah.
So definitely didn't know anything about it. I kind of assumed women were a part of it, but that was about it. So.
Yeah. So, what fun kind of events we have a special guest.
We do.
I have previously recorded it, so I'm talking about it in past tense. But I recorded a little interview with one of my OTA instructors.
Okay.
So that was a fun little time to kind of talk about the history of OT and kind of talk about some of the things that happened. So before we jump to that interview, I wanted to get your take. What do you think? Like, what's your impression of, or as someone who's worked with OTs, like, what do you think, where do you think OT comes from? Like, what's your perception of our history?
I mean, I would assume it has like a medical history behind it. Like maybe something was missing in the medical field, like the need. And somebody was like, hey, I'm going to meet that need. But y'all have such a broad area, so that's really hard. I'm about to learn a lot. You're making a face. I don't love it. He's making really bad faces, guys.
No, it just makes me excited. I'm not making bad faces. I'm literally smiling.
Just know that we're all going to learn together, everyone who's listening, plus me, because we do not know what's going on. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, it's going to be super cool. We talk a lot about it. We do talk about kind of some of how, like, where OT came from and how it's shifted, because our scope, like you said, is so wide. So we explore that a little bit and explore some of the different changes that have happened in our country that have opened up doors for occupational therapy to expand into that just felt very natural and made sense. And so, it just makes me excited because I'm like, if this is the perception that people have, then I'm excited for them to hear like maybe a little bit more of the details.
So you're excited about what I don't know.
I'm excited for your ability and this opportunity for you to learn.
Yay! Okay, so I'm excited to listen.
Yeah.
So I hope y'all enjoy and learn a lot.
And so we're going to throw to in the future, well, in the past?
We're going to roll back to the past.
Roll back to
the history.
The history of the...
Roll back really far. Maybe, I don't know.
The history of OT, and we're going to jump to our an interview that I did. It's me and my friend Laura.
Okay.
So we will be back and see you guys in a little bit.
Bye.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
This is our first segment, our first special guest of the podcast. Welcome to the Co-Treat. Everybody put your hands together. Clap, 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 clap. I'm here with my friend Laura.
Hi.
So who are you? Why are you here?
I am here because Jonathan can't get rid of me.
As if I would try.
I know. Jonathan was my student when he went through OTA school, and I knew then that he was very special and that we would be friends after. And now we just get together and we talk OT a lot. Yeah.
It's like our conversations always start out really long. Literally the other night in preparation for this, I had a homework assignment due. And I was like, but I need to call Laura and kind of get, like, just kind of touch base on things. And then we wound up talking for an hour. I was like, this is going to be a quick 5-10 minute conversation. And it was an hour long, which...
It's always that.
I told my mom afterwards, I was like, Mom, this is my problem. I just love her. and I just love talking to her. So I can't just talk to her for a minute. It turns into an hour. So then I stayed up after midnight working on homework.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I actually had homework that I forgot that was due. And so I did my homework after I hung up with you. So
Because you are an OT.
I'm an OT.
You've had your master's for a long time.
Almost 20 years.
So very like experienced and knowledgeable. And you're going back to get your doctorate.
Yes, I am. Because I am working on starting some new programs.
Yeah.
And so I'm going back to get that final, hopeful terminal degree. No more schooling after that. And so
So super cool. She's like deeply entrenched. Laura is one of those people, in my brain, she's one of those OTs that is really just kind of like the gold standard because she's so passionate about OT that she just keeps going more and more and more. She's super involved obviously she was my instructor. So she's gone out of clinical practice, took a little break for a minute, went into education. She's back in clinical practice now on top of being in education. And now she's gone back to her school herself to further her degree. And she's also involved in our, kind of some like our state board and stuff. So she's a pretty cool lady. She's one of my she's one of my inspiring women, harkening back to March. She's one of the inspiring women that I like look up to a whole lot.
I pay him to say these things about me, but
not enough.
Yes.
Just kidding. So I wanted to bring you on because this is something that we've talked about. It's April. Happy OT month.
Yay!
Whoop, whoop, whoop. Hope you're having some fun times in OT month. Full disclosure, we are not filming this in April, so I can't ask her what she's done. What have you done for OT month? We're fully recording this in March.
But I will tell you, it's a great week to be recording this because I am fresh off of attending the American Occupational Therapy Association's national conference last week in Orlando. And so I'm on fire for OT, which I feel like I am all the time, but I'm fully...
Yeah.
I'm ready to talk about whatever comes about OT because I've just been filling my brain with it for the last week.
So I've never been to one of these conferences, but everybody always talks about how magical they are because I know what it's like to go to our state conferences, but not even the big one, just the smaller one. And I know how much I love that and just being around those OT people, and it just makes my heart sing. And I'm just these are my people. So I can really only imagine going to AOTA and being surrounded by hundreds of OT people.
It's like 50,000. It's a lot of people.
It is not 50,000.
It is. We have
50,000.
Yeah, we were in the second largest conference center in the nation because that's how big our conference is. It's
50,000 OT people?
Yeah, thousands of people are there.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's huge. So I think that's why I am so passionate about OT. I had never attended a national conference until 2019. I drove to New Orleans. That's where it was, with a friend of mine who is someone I look up to, who's very passionate about OT. Her name's Rachel. She wrote a textbook about trauma. She's awesome.
Love that.
And just talked to her about OT, and she was already presenting at the national level and just filled my brain with passion for OT. But when I went, it was amazing because you're hearing presentations. They're so divided on different topics that if you're someone who has an interest in mental health, you could go to 16 sessions on mental health, or you could go to sessions on advocacy or on what's new in I actually went to an 8-hour session the day before the big conference started on OT in the primary care setting. So an emerging practice area.
Yeah.
There were people there teaching complementary health, Reiki and integrative type things. It's kind of where you get to experience all of the really cool niche areas of OT. There were the focus this year, there was a lot on people who want to create things in private practice. Maternal health was a really big thing. Pelvic floor health. Cool. All of that, all of those kind of that's what you're getting at this level, because they're the best of the best people, present.
Yeah.
And so it's really, you can see a lot of really cool things that just get you fired up about what we can do, where we can go, what we can be involved in. And I think that really ties very interestingly to what we're about to talk about with the history of OT, because OT has always adapted to what was current, what was happening in the world. And so we've adapted. We haven't stayed the same. We haven't been flat. We've been continuing to grow and develop and just provide what the world needs, specifically our country, but with OT. But it's really interesting to me. And I think that's why I'm passionate about teaching this bit. And I don't know if my students love learning about the history of OT, because it is a lot of dates, but it's and a lot of laws. But I think I have not really ever been a political person per se, but now I'm pretty passionate about kind of keeping track of law and things that are happening, because I'm realizing it has a direct impact on our profession and our reimbursement and our livelihood. And so I pay way more attention now to what's happening, because it is in direct correlation with, okay, we had COVID happen in 2020, and there's been this major mental health crisis that was unveiled. And here's how OT has responded to that. That was something historically that happened in our country. And we're seeing that the growth of OT in pediatric practice, but not just pediatric practice, but like in schools, the focus, the trends are growing towards meeting these mental health needs.
Yeah.
And how cool that's our roots that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Like that's where we came from. And so we haven't gotten stagnant. We've grown with what's happening in the world. And I just think that's really cool.
Yeah. One thing that I love about occupational therapy is occupational therapy always seems to be like silently leading the charge in a lot of areas, because our focus is so person-centered. And so it always feels like anytime I learn a new fact about OT history, or about some sort of a series of events that happened in some shift that took place in OT, it always feels like we are riding the front edge of the wave and everybody else is catching up to us a lot of the time. At least, and even if we're not doing it in practice, they're developing theory around it, where it's these are the things that are important and these are the shifts that we're seeing. And so we're trying to specifically, one of the big things that's important to me is OT has been an inclusive field for a very long time when nobody was talking about inclusion. It was really because our, focus is very much on treating the whole person and the individual person in whatever way, in whatever space that they find themselves, or whatever way of life they find themselves, or whatever. So that's one of the big things that I always found really interesting, because on the civil rights movement and the LGBTQIA plus movement stuff, we've always, as a profession, kind of been on the leading edge of that, which I always find really interesting and I'm very inspired by, because even before people have really, because let's be real, in the last 20 years since I've been alive, there's been a huge push for a lot of, inclusivity and things like that. And we were doing it already. OT's been doing it.
Yeah.
We done been there.
And what I think is cool about that is we look at daily living things that are meaningful and important to people and realize that the way they do it may be different than the way we do it. My friend Alyssa, who was at AOTA with me, went to this workshop that I really wish I had gone to. And she said when she walked in, it was just different tables of activities of daily living. And it was this is how different cultures do hair care. So even though that grooming is just a activity of daily living, we should know and embrace, or even know how to ask about how often someone does wash their hair or style their hair, or how they wrap it, or what tools they use for hair care. And then she went to another table and it was different types of religious practices and things like that. So it was a very come and go, explore, learn about different cultures kind of workshop. But I mean, again, yeah, exactly. Inclusive, because if we are trying to meet someone where they are and we're trying to work around their who they are and what they're into, then we have to be respectful and embrace and understand that we're not trying to get someone to do something the way we do it. We want them to do it in the way they do it.
Yeah.
So we have to ask and be open and have an open mind and have that cultural competence or cultural humility that we don't know everything about it, that we ask and we say, please share with me about yourself and what you know.
I remember that it makes me think of an experience I had as a student where I was working in a hospital, and there was a lady who she was Black, and she had she was having a hard time taking care of her hair in the hospital. And like, I have no experience with that kind of texture, that kinky curly texture hair. And I was really nervous, and like, even still just like right now talking about it, I'm like, I don't know exactly the words to use and like the language to like make it sound sensitive and like make sure that I'm giving this lady respect and all the things. But it was a really interesting experience. And I was like, this is very important. Like, this is real life and this is very important. And I don't know how to help this lady based on my own experience, but I do know how to, like, she can inform me of how she does it, and then I can help make adjustments or come up with some plan of action.
Do you know what's cool though about our profession is they've written a paper. It's on AOTA about hair care for different hair. So this is just a plug for being a member of your national organization and your state organization, but it's very important. And we'll get into that when we talk about history a little bit, but your membership in AOTA there's a purpose, and they pay to people to write these things and have resources for us. And Jonathan and I were talking about this last night, but it used to be kind of expensive to have an AOTA membership. Like, you had to pay once a year. It's kind of a big chunk. For an OT, it was like $225 as a new grad. I was like, oh, got to come up with that amount. That's a lot. But now I pay monthly $14 and something cents, and plus my membership for our state association. I mean, it's like less than $20. So it's like less than a meal out now to be a member of both. And I get so much from everywhere. Like, AOTA has so many resources that
it's really nice. What's really funny is, listen, I promise. So the purpose of bringing Laura on to this was to talk about the history of OT, to kind of give a rundown. I realize we are, I don't know, like close to 15 minutes in and we haven't even started. This is what I'm talking about. We just go.
Okay, well, let's do it.
Well, I want to give one. Well, okay. I had an idea. I had a plug and then I forgot. Oh, this is what it was for that. So it's funny because I had an assignment last night that was talking about, we had to find a research article talking about some sort of intervention for mental health. And, what was funny is that it specifically said in the assignment to use the library of the school for resources. But what wound up happening is the library directed me to AJOT, the American Journal of Occupational Therapy, which you have free access to. Well, it's not free. I mean, you're paying for it, but like, you have access to it as a member of AOTA, which just cracked me up because I was like, the instructions say you use the school's library as a resource, but all roads lead back to AJOT. They just do. So it's really great.
Okay, Jonathan, the history.
Let's do it.
Let's start.
History.
So,
where did OT come from?
What's cool about OT is that we come from different, and think about it. If you know anybody in the OT world, we're a little bit of teacher, we're a little bit of nursing, we're a little bit of doctor. I feel like we're detective, though there were no detectives back in the early years when all this came together. But there was an architect. There was I think I've hit on all the things. A teacher, 2 physicians, a nurse, a teacher, maybe a social worker, because I think Eleanor Clark-Slagle was a social worker. Social worker. Yeah. And they pulled from things that had been done back in like the 1700s and 1800s, a thing called moral treatment, and even an arts and crafts movement. There were some things that were happening that were like, hey, these people are sick. They need to get out of bed. Let's give them something purposeful for them to do so they'll want to get out of bed. And everybody was like, oh yeah, cool. Great idea. Yeah. That's really what birthed OT. Yeah. And it started kind of in a movement for nursing, like under kind of a nursing header, I guess. But a lot of the people that were the founders, which we were founded in 1917, so we're over 100 years old. Yeah. we started with these founders who were doing things with people with tuberculosis or with mental illness or, still kind of that restorative, find a purpose for someone. That was kind of the focus. And all these people came together in 1917 and they were like, let's start this new profession.
Yeah.
Let's start occupational therapy.
One thing I thought was really interesting, and I was just reminded of kind of recently going through school, is like occupational therapy didn't just happen. Like it didn't just like what you were saying. It didn't just, somebody didn't just come up with the idea of it and be like, okay, let's make a profession. Like there were people for decades and come to find out a couple hundred years before OT was officially founded as its own profession that were using concepts of taking occupation to help rehabilitate people in a lot of spaces. And think back to like what you know of, like the 1800s and the 1700s, where people who were considered like had what we now think of as mental health conditions. These are people that were just locked up in asylums because nobody knew what to do with them.
Yeah.
And they're people that were being lobotomized, and people were doing all these kinds of like really, they weren't treated as people.
No.
They weren't treated as like human people. They were treated as secondary, or sometimes people, I mean, literally there are texts out there and like quotes from people that describe people with these like significant psychiatric conditions at the time as like animals. And the people that kind of influenced the beginning of OT were people who were working with those individuals, recognizing their humanity and trying to give them some semblance of purpose.
Yeah.
Some like bring some level of meaning to their life. And so that's really inspirational to me because I'm like, these are people, they're using these concepts, and cumulatively over a really long time, we then had these 6 amazing individuals who came together in 1917 to be like, we're going to do it, and we're going to do it for real. And we're going to like claim our space as this new profession.
Yeah.
Which I think is so cool.
You should put this on your Instagram, but there's a picture of the founders.
Totally should.
That it makes me laugh now because we did this escape room project with our OTA program and an OT program. We joined together and we made an escape room, and the students had to work through all these puzzles about the 9 areas of occupation to get out of the room. But one of our puzzles was an actual puzzle that they had to put together of the founders.
Oh,
and the students laugh and they're like, ooh, who are these ghosts? Who are these old people? Like the comments that people made about that picture is so funny. So maybe if we put it on your Instagram, people will like burn that picture into their memory.
Totally should. It's really great. And I just look at the picture, like we've got it in front of us. Laura's got it in a textbook that she has. And then I have it in my current textbook. And it makes me smile because I'm just like, these are our they honestly kind of feel like family. It kind of feels like looking at an old family photo where you're like, these are my people. This is who I come from.
Well, and what's so interesting is talking about AOTA, Eleanor Clark Slagle, who was a founder of our profession, they named a lectureship, like the highest lectureship you could get. Every year, someone is awarded the ability to do this presentation at the national conference in her name. It's the Eleanor Clark Slagle Lectureship, which is pretty awesome. And then,
like, what a boss,
right?
We talked about Eleanor Clark Slagle a little bit on our last episode, and on our Inspiring Women for March, and she just like is great. Like, she's amazing. She's great. I want her to be her best friend.
And she was considered the mother of OT. And then the father of OT was William Rush Dutton, who created AJOT like way back in the day. So, and here it is hundreds of years later, and that's still around. So, I mean, he edited it for like into the 60s. So long time.
Wow.
Very cool. Yeah.
Thanks, dude.
And then
not calling him dude. Oh my gosh. Like, how disrespectful. Thank you, Mr. Sir.
That's funny that you say that, because I do an assignment with the students where we pretend that one of the founders has time traveled into the future, and then what kind of conversation would they have with them about what's happening in OT now?
Yeah.
It's a really fun
That's
assignment.
fun.
Yeah. So they probably would call them dude, right?
Well, I did. I feel anyway, I'm embarrassed.
No, don't be embarrassed. So as the world changed, we started having some world war. That's a hard phrase to
World
say.
war.
World wars.
Yeah.
And so OT kind of shifted more in that time frame to meet the need of men who had gone off to war, who had some kind of injury, and they were struggling with their daily life. And so OT became part of this group called the Reconstruction Aides, who were women that were going to help these men both with their physical health, but also their mental health. So I would say we saw a lot of the shell shock and all of those things that were happening with men as they came back from war. Their body was physically changed. They couldn't go back and do the jobs maybe that they did before. They needed a purpose. And here was OT helping again at this point to try to help people find that purpose, that meaning in their life, right? But also to do those daily activities and those things that we now call ADLs and IDLs and, you know, the 9 areas, work and play and leisure and all those things like social participation, health management, which is a new area of occupation since 2020. But so all of that is kind of how we progressed on into that area at that time. And then,
which I think is really interesting because that was right around, oh gosh, I'm going to get my dates wrong, but OT was founded in 1917 and World War I was in the 1910s. So it was right at that same time that like all this was happening all this was happening together.
Yeah.
And imagine an America when all this is happening where literally all of the men, the able-bodied men were off fighting in the war across the world. And it was the women stayed behind to like run the country. And then here they were trying to rehabilitate the men as they come back home. And these are people, and we all know it. Like everybody knows, imagine the veteran that you know, because we all have experience with a veteran who has served in some capacity, who struggles. You know, they struggle with that ability to kind of like integrate back into life.
Yeah.
And we hear about all the truly like the epidemic of soldiers who are really struggle to integrate back into civilian life after being in service.
It depends on what war too. Like if you think about the Vietnam War, so many people were against, and we're bumping up to the 70s, but like so many people were against that war that when people came back from fighting in that war, not only were they reintegrating to civilian life, they were reintegrating to being hated for having participated in that war.
Yeah.
So
just imagine like how great an impact that has on people's ability to function in their like daily life. You know, it affects everything.
Yeah.
Their whole world is flipped upside down.
Yeah.
Because suddenly, I mean, I heard somebody say one time, and this is relevant because OT has shifted with the different wars that has come up in the United States. Somebody, I heard I think it was, I don't remember who it was, but it was a lady who was given a talk on, she did a lot of work with veterans, and she said that the skills necessary to be a really wonderful soldier, to be a very capable and efficient, effective soldier, are not the same skills that it takes to be a civilian. To be a very productive member of society in civilian life. It takes different skills. And so when people go to boot camps and they go to, you know, when they go to these training facilities, and then beyond that, if they actually are deployed and go to war and like fight, they truly have learned skills that are not applicable. And what she was talking about specifically was the kind of the cognitive skills to be able to like shut out your emotions, compartmentalize, to survive and make very quick reactionary decisions in high stress situations. And those same skills are not effective at being a productive member of society where you are in this kind of collaborative space with other people, because you're not making life and death decisions all the time. You're not in this high stress situation where you have to make you don't have to be hyper vigilant and hyper aware and in those kinds of states. But if that's what you've trained your body to do, it's very hard to come back from that. So it takes help. Like that's why you see a lot of in what she was talking about. That's why a lot of veterans struggle to reintegrate back into life afterwards.
Makes so much sense.
And it affects their whole. As an OT person, I was like, this makes so much sense as to why people. It completely disrupts their whole life and their ability to engage in any of these occupations that are so meaningful, whether it's their work or their ability to take care of themselves when they get home, or take care of other people, or engagement in any sort of leisure activities or whatever it is.
Romantic partnerships.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's so hard because you have literally trained your brain and your body out of
reactively.
Yes. And out of those kinds of like communal civilian skills in order to be an effective soldier. And so it just makes it challenging. So what you were talking about in this kind of Reconstruction era, these Reconstruction aides and stuff, they were doing the work to help those people come back.
Yeah. I think we're really good at helping with transitions. I think that's a big, because OT looks at the person, the environment, the occupation. Which of those things can we modify? Which of those things can we build up? Is it all of the things? That's always been the theory or the model that I've always aligned with really well, because we have so many different things to play with and work with.
Yeah.
Also, just to hit on some other things that were happening in the world, we started having drugs that made us live longer. We had way more technology that was coming around, like things that could help us in all types of the world, like in factories. People weren't making things by hand, so there was that disconnect from things like that. Deinstitutionalization, that's a hard word to say, but that happened where it used to be, you were talking about people who were just locked up for having mental illness. Somebody was like, hey, this isn't really cool for us to just lock up people. I mean, now it would be women who had postpartum depression or something like that would have been locked up back then. And all of those people went back out into the community and they started shutting down all of these big state hospitals. And so looking at how that affected our world and what things we could do. I want to give a plug for a movie that's on Netflix. It's called Crip Camp. I watch it with my students every year. We pop popcorn and watch it and have a big event. And it really highlights this group of people who went to this camp back in the 70s called Camp Jened. And they were all kids with different types of disabilities, and how these campers they weren't OT practitioners, but they were just camper counselors that made these campers feel like they meant something. And then it kind of followed these people through their lives, and it really highlights like the civil rights movement, but then it also looks at the disability rights movement, which happened, it started happening in the 70s. I don't know if I've missed anything I will say, I'll highlight in the late 50s, early 60s is when the role of the OTA was created. And it was created to meet the growing need for occupational therapy. They were like, we need to have a way to get more people into our profession quickly. So they created the OTA, which that's pretty rare. Our country is about the only one that has OTAs in that capacity. But we are a very large country, so it makes sense to have different levels. But
tell me if this is correct. This is what I remember, and this could be wrong. So please correct me if this is not right.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, OTAs were created because of an event happening in the 50s and 60s. Maybe it was one of the Korean War or something was happening. But there was maybe something like that.
Polio and the Korean War.
Okay. There was the Korean War, and OTs were being taken out of OTs from the United States were leaving the U.S. and going to help in the war to rehabilitate the soldiers again. And so it left a void of OT practitioners. And so they needed a way to deliver OT services quickly, but maybe not with the full extent of OT. And so that's why OTAs became a thing, was to fill the space that was created by the vast need that was another major war.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Is that
I was
right?
looking at the book. Yeah, it looks like that's correct.
Okay. That's what I thought.
Medicare, which was our first federally mandated healthcare. It came out in 1965. But the thing I was talking about in Crip Camp, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, it was like the first fight for civil rights for people with disabilities. So in Crip Camp, they talk about like they would put kids with disabilities in the basement. And if you couldn't make it to the basement, it didn't mean that you had to have school. You didn't have to go to school, right? And so you need to watch this movie because I don't think you've seen it, but like
I haven't.
they show them having sit-ins and all of these things that they do to say, we need these rights. We deserve these rights. They would shut down major streets in DC, protesting with signs, and it's all these people in wheelchairs and on walkers and with blind canes and like white canes. And, you know, like all these people are like, hey, we are people. We deserve access to all of these things that everyone deserves access to. We are people.
Yeah.
And so it's really cool, but like it took until ADA passed, the Americans with Disabilities Act passed in 1990. So it took like in 73, the Rehab Act passed, but for them to actually have access to accessible accommodations in the workforce, all buildings should be accessible. Public buildings should be accessible to people who want to access them, like libraries and restaurants and whatever. Like 1990, that's like within my lifetime. That just seems so insane that it took that long for that to happen.
Yeah.
They started passing acts in the 70s that all children should be able to access education. So the Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975. Then they followed with the Handicapped Infants and Toddlers Act, which was like early intervention.
Yeah.
So all of these things like have come about in the last, 20, 30 years. I don't know how long ago 1990 was now, but
at this point, it's 34 years.
It seems like it was yesterday.
34 years.
Big things happen. And then eventually they started having reforms to healthcare, like Social Security Act and prospective payment and all of these things that kind of changed how we were reimbursed. And most people who are practicing now will know that we had some major changes that happened just a couple years ago. In 2019 and 2020, we had PDPM and PDGM, which were both really big plans to try to stop Medicare fraud. And so it hit skilled nursing and home health. And so both of those areas were really hit hard in cuts to try to rein things in. People who were maybe practicing and billing things that didn't need to be billed. And so make sure I didn't hit anything between 90. We had Obamacare that happened in the 2010s. And that was the first attempt at like healthcare for all in our country. And so it had some things that worked and some things that didn't work. But like our country is really trying to adjust and figure out how we can help everyone. And I think what's so cool about all of that is that OT has adjusted in that each thing that happened, like here were these wars. So we adjusted to help with rehabilitation. But then like all of these people with mental illness were now back in the community. So we started doing some community-based things. And all of these kids with disabilities now were getting access to school. And so we stepped in and started working in the schools. And like I mentioned earlier, COVID happened. And now all these kids are showing these delays in their social emotional learning. And so we are the ones to step in and work on that. And so I think that AOTA has had this vision for a while. You mentioned diversity, equity, inclusion. Like we've had this vision for a while of all these things that we want to be the profession that's known for this. We look at sensory integration and all our knowledge on self-regulation, all of these things that like we can do both the physical and the mental because we look at the whole person and we look at what's important to them and how they style their hair and how they, how they participate with their community in this specific really important religious ceremony that they participate in or whatever it is. This is a really fun social thing that we do with our friends. And it's important that I get there to have access to that. So I think that's what's so cool about OT and why so many people don't really get what we do, because it's so personalized and special and unique. And that's what I love about it. And why, if you do it right, you'll never be bored because you're doing something different.
Absolutely. It really just kind of comes to show, I like what you said about how, like, as these different changes have happened, OT has shifted and made adjustments, and it shows how we've diversified, because I think in the inception of OT, hopefully with some of these things that you've touched on, you can kind of see a pattern of, like, in the beginning, there was a heavy focus on psychiatric conditions, mental health. Even the people coming back from war, there's still a heavy focus on, like, the shell shock, as it used to be known. Now it's like PTSD. But it was a heavy influence on those things. I mean, a heavy emphasis on those things. And as time continued, what they learned was engagement in occupation also has a very, it can be used as a tool to physically rehab people and help with physical conditions. But then also, people need help with their physical conditions in order to engage in their daily occupations. So there was a shift in that regard. And then as, kiddos got access to help, and it became law that every kid had the right to education. Then there was a big shift on, like, what about the kids who struggle in engaging in those academic occupations and their education? And so there was a major shift in that area and an expansion. And like you said, early intervention, where these are teeny tiny little, I call them teeny tiny little tots, but the teeny tiniest of the humans were, having access to help. There's just another area that OT stepped in and was like, we understand what it takes to engage in these occupations and engage in daily life. So it makes sense that we are the ones to be there to fill that space. And so there's really been a diversification of what OT can be, because it's something that me and Magnolia talked about on one of our, kind of recent, on our last podcast about, what is OT? And it's really a mindset. In my view of it, it's really, it's not a protocol. It's not a step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is a mindset of figuring out what is important and how, like, what activities and, like, things that you need to do in your life are important to you, what is keeping you from them, and how can we help? And so there's so many areas, because we're not strictly focused on, we're only going to help people in their mental health. We're only going to help people in their physical health. We're only going to help people in their nutritional health. Like, we're not nailed down to any particular area, because our profession is so much about the whole, like you said, the whole person. And it's more about what's your engagement and your participation in these meaningful occupations. And what affects that is wide reaching and
I think we do look to what's happening in the world. Like, Roe v. Wade was just repealed, and women are kind of up in arms about having autonomy over their body and knowing how to, and rightfully so, knowing, like, that we can help ourselves and we can do, and OT is a primarily female dominated field. And so,
which we talked about in March.
Right. And so, like, we're like, well, who can help women? We can help women. We can look at helping them with their pelvic floor, and we can look at helping them with postpartum depression. And we can look at things that women can help women with, not that men can't help women, but you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, we can look at, women who have, I saw there were some really cool presentations about period poverty, and people have started developing adaptive equipment that helps people who don't have good dexterity but still have
menstrual cycles.
Yeah, and female parts. I want to use inclusive language. People who have female parts.
Yeah.
But, like, that need something. There are people now that there are devices now that exist for that, and there's people who are working to do things that are supportive in that nature. And so I think that's so cool that we rise to whatever is happening in the world, and we're like, we can do that. OT can do that. Now, it makes for a lot of when you are trying to concisely give your spiel about what OT is, it does become kind of interesting. But I always teach the students, like, look at what that person is and what they're into and figure it out. And that's how you pitch it to them. And it may look different to everybody you pitch it to, everybody you give your elevator speech to. But I did want to highlight a few things that are happening in the world that I learned about in the AOTA sessions.
Yeah. So current events.
Current events. There's been some cuts and when I mention Medicare a lot, it's because most of the private insurances follow what happens with Medicare. Like CMS, Medicare, Medicaid basically lead what private insurances do. So if it happens with Medicare and Medicaid, it'll likely happen with private insurance as well. But there's been some big cuts. They call it the physician's fee schedule. And it caused cuts across the board for physicians all the way down to all therapy practitioners. So in all areas, PAs, nurse practitioners, social work, like anybody that is reimbursed from Medicare and Medicaid, there were big cuts. And so that has made it really hard on people who have private practices or things like that. Like there continues to be cuts that impact not just physicians, because it's called the physician's fee schedule, but everyone. And so there's been a lot of advocacy on behalf of AOTA, and just again a plug, but our money that goes to our political action committee goes to put people, these fancy lobbyists, in front of people in Congress who make decisions about how we get reimbursed and make money again. So it's important to be a member, but they've gotten a little bit of the money released back. So the cut was not as severe as it was going to happen. So that was a big win.
Nice.
They are looking at telehealth. When COVID hit, we were we got an emergency order that we could do telehealth, but it wasn't permanent. Yeah. And they keep pushing to have that stay put, because we've shown the value of telehealth. And so we've got that extended, I think, through the end of 2024 for sure. And they're looking to push it. There's more legislation, and legislation is slow. Yeah. Things get put forth in the House and the Senate, and, we're about to have a big turnover and all of that when we have a big presidential election. And so things are either going to happen really quickly this year, or they're going to slow up and wait until the next session. But there's some big cool things that are happening, in that they've put forth this bill that states that mental health OTs are qualified mental health practitioners. And so they've put that forth. Hopefully that will pass.
Because it was not that long ago that there was something. Well, I guess it was Medicare or Medicaid or something was done that excluded OT as mental health professionals. And so and the reason that's important is because what that means is that we don't have access to those funds that those Medicare and Medicaid funds that pay for people receiving mental health services.
Right.
We are excluded from that. What that means also, kind of like given the stair steps of that, if we don't have access to those funds, then that means that you're going to have less people being able to access OT services who need help for their mental health.
Right.
That's why these things are important.
We used to be able to bill mental healthy stuff under those physical health codes. Like we're seeing somebody for a traumatic brain injury or a stroke. We can totally hit mental health when we're working on those things. But like having the ability to bill specific mental health codes without a physical diagnosis would open up jobs, so many jobs, right?
And imagine the kiddos that you work with because Laura works in a hospital,
acute psychiatric hospital.
An acute psychiatric hospital. And so those kids are not coming to her with physical dysfunction. Right. They're coming to her with some sort of acute mental health struggle. And if she doesn't have, if there's not access to these funds, then these kids can't get OT services, which they desperately need, because this is what I have found. Okay. And this is not across the board. I know that there are many, many places that are absolutely wonderful and fantastic and great. But what I have heard time and time again from people who have been admitted in these kinds of facilities and also people who have worked in them, a lot of the time the heavy focus is on like keeping you alive. You know, it's like you are in a very vulnerable state because of your medical state is very vulnerable because maybe you had some suicidal ideation, or maybe an attempt, or maybe it's just unclear that you may do harm to yourself or somebody else, or can be the case.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is the doctors and the nursing staff are like, we got to make sure that you are keep you alive because you could be physically not well. But oftentimes it's the OT people who are like, let's make sure, like, let's develop. It's the OT and the counseling team kind of working collaboratively that gets you back on your feet in a healthier mental head space.
Right.
So like it's important for OT people to be there because it's like, it's great that you are not coming up with a plan to end your life. That is wonderful. And I love that so much, but that's not all that we need to do.
Right.
We need to give you some aid so that you don't fall back into that cycle again.
Right.
You know, because then you're
like, hey, Laura, well, how are you doing that now if this law hasn't passed? It's billed in like a chunk to the hospital. So like OT doesn't specifically bill on its own. And so that's why you don't see a lot of OT currently like in a community-based setting doing this because it's not currently, we don't, especially in our state, like we're not exclusively highlighted as a mental health practitioner. And so we're just billed as part of like a group, a reimbursement chunk for this kiddo to the hospital. And so our hospital luckily has seen the value of OT in mental health, but like growing our program and building more people there, there's not a lot of money in it yet. Mm-hmm. And so, I hope at some point we will have a huge team that does that.
I hope so. It's so cool.
A few more quick pieces.
Okay.
OT is now able to start a home health case. That was not the case for a long time. When I did home health, we didn't do that.
Yeah.
Nurses could start the case, PTs could start the case, speech could start the case, but OT could not. And so now OT can open a case as long as there is another discipline in there with them for at least 1 or 2 visits, which again, why can't it just be OT? And they're working to fight for it to just be OT.
Yeah.
It's weird how that is. Okay.
We are enough on our own.
I know.
We are amazing.
The Department of Education has recognized a crisis in mental health in schools. And so there's a lot of really cool OT and school mental health type things that are happening. Lots of big, huge grants that are happening. 2 OT schools in the nation have gotten awarded like $1 million grants to like design programming that can be trickled out into the schools. And so I think that's really cool.
That's really exciting.
Yeah. There's some really big things. Oh, the licensure compact, which means you could work in different states. What's holding that up is the FBI releasing information. So they had to have federal legislation to say, hey, release everyone's information and background checks to all the other states so that we can have this licensure compact. So again, that's something big that is holding up some stuff. They are throwing OT into a lot of addiction-based bills because they're seeing the value of OT in addiction.
Listen, I promise we will cover these things. If you're sitting here thinking like, what in the world is OT gonna do, like in addiction? Like, I promise, one day we'll get there, and we'll talk about it.
Yes,
because we can be so helpful for so many people suffering or struggling with so many different things.
Yes. And that's enough.
That's enough. There's so much going on. And what I really hope that we were able to highlight today, because this is one of my pet peeves. It's not a pet peeve. It's just ignorance. It's people's ignorance and they just don't know.
Yeah.
But what I hope that we've been able to highlight today is like OT has had a unique history. We have had our background is unique. Our process is special. Like we are our own special little, like, I really think of OTs as unicorns. Mm-hmm. I really do. And because we're just kind of these rare creatures that kind of flit in between. Like, we're so important and we're so special and we have so many wonderful abilities, but like nobody knows about us. And what I have heard in the past, I've heard on multiple occasions that, you know, occupational therapy, we get compared to like specifically physical therapy a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I love physical therapy.
Me too.
PT is amazing. I love my PT friends and I value what they do so very much. But I hope that what we have highlighted is that literally somebody told me one time, they're like, well, occupational therapy came from PT.
No.
And I hope that what we have described is it is not the same.
No.
We are not the same. And because we are unique and special.
Yeah. And we beautifully can co-treat, as that's the name of your podcast.
Absolutely.
With all of these disciplines.
Absolutely.
Like social workers and counselors and PT and speech and doctors and nursing. And it depends on where you are and what you're doing. Teachers, oh my gosh. OT practitioners and teachers go together like peanut butter and jelly. It's great to be able to have the ability to co-treat when you have the ability to join forces and everyone brings their unique value to the table. So
one thing too, and this is kind of my own personal, this is a pet peeve. Maybe it's not a pet peeve. Maybe it's just like a dream. Maybe that's a better way to describe it. But in my view of OT, we are so able to recognize a person's need and figure out what they're struggling with. And so it is aggravating to me when I hear things about us not being able to open up our own cases in home health, or us being a related service in schools.
Right.
And I'm like, occupational therapy is so capable of being a leader in these areas, but we're prevented from those positions by the rules that are in place. So it's like, because, for instance, like what you just said, you know, in home health, you've had to have nursing or PT or speech. They had to open the case. And then we were kind of like Santa's little helpers that come in and like, you know, yay, pick us, you know. And then in schools, it's the same. Like kids have to qualify, at least in Alabama. I don't know if this is true everywhere, but kids have to qualify for SPED services or speech services before they can even be considered for occupational therapy services. And I'm like, but it doesn't make sense why we could not be our own, because we could so easily be able to like help other people recognize a larger scope of challenge and help collaboratively come up with ideas of how to help them. You know, like even in this space, I on multiple occasions have recommended to the speech team of like, hey, maybe this kid needs some AAC, because this is based on what I know of their function. I don't know that they've got the cognitive capacity yet to do what we're expecting. Or maybe we need to step it back and be like, you know, maybe we're not there yet, or maybe it just isn't working. And so we need to help them with like what's happening now, give them some access to something that's going to be helpful in this moment, rather than, you know, something that may take years to develop, you know. But I think that's the beauty of what occupational therapy can do, is because we are looking at such our view is so interesting, and we're really looking at like your functional capacity in these important activities and these things, and what is keeping you from that. And so I don't understand why we are blocked from being leaders and being like helpers to other people when we could be leaders. But that's also like, I hope that doesn't sound like I'm poo-pooing on anybody else, because they're amazing and I love them all. Like I love my speechies and I love my PT people and I love the nurses. Like,
well, you know what I think
I just want equal respect, I guess. I
think it's because sometimes, you know, that phrase like choose your battles. I think sometimes people are like, when the 500th person says, so y'all are like PT, right? Or, oh, y'all work on fine motor, right? And sometimes people are just like, or they're in a job where they do find themselves doing a lot of fine motor or handwriting or whatever, or upper body strengthening. Shoot me if I ever just do upper body strengthening over and over. But like, we do maybe get a little complacent because it is kind of hard to get that big breath and explain all the things that we can do. But I think you get bored and I think you get pigeonholed if you don't just advocate for all of the things that you do. And again, gonna highlight AOTA, but when I have this is an assignment I do with my students in the summer semester, but like knowing how to verbalize the value of OT to different prospective payer sources and to insurance companies and regulatory boards and consumers, patients, potential employers, which this is also an accreditation standard. I didn't make this up, but I picked specific cases from my personal work history of things that have been said to me. And then I say to the students, highlight this with evidence, how you can back this up. And so they go to AOTA, and AOTA has all these position papers on all of these things, like why OT is valuable in mental health. And here's the evidence that backs that. Why OT can work with the LGBTQIA population. And here it is. OT's value in school-based cases, right? But like, here is the evidence. So you don't have to have that argument alone. You don't have to be the person who has those words all the time in your head. Like you just go to AOTA, you print the position paper and you're like, here's why we're valuable. But like, I think as a student, if you experience that right away, sometimes you're like, oh, am I going to choose the battle with my Uber driver that's driving me from here to there? Or am I just going to like be like, yeah, I guess we're kind of like that. Right. And I've lost that battle sometimes too, like seriously, but having the ability to speak up. And that's probably why my students sometimes are like, oh, Miss Smith's going to make us talk again. Right. But, it is what it is. Sometimes it's like you need to be able to talk, to be able to highlight yourself and be able to know how to speak up for our profession. So,
and that's one thing that we talked about a little bit in our, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if that is one of the things. I wonder if that has come about. Well, I wonder if that's influenced by the fact that our field is like dominated by women. And because women for so long, their voices weren't listened to.
Women couldn't even, I learned this weekend. Women could not even have a credit card in their own name. They could not take out a loan on a home or something until the 70s.
Yeah.
The 1970s.
Yeah.
That's like one decade removed from when I was born. Like I was born in the early 80s. Like insane to me that I would have had to now as a single person have a credit card that had someone else's name on it, like an uncle or my parents or whatever. Like, that's wild.
And so I wonder if there is a link, because for so long, our field has been developed and built by amazing women, and it continues to be dominated by women. But we have a very long history of women's voices not being equally respected and equally heard. And so some of that advocacy for ourselves, while OT as a profession is wonderful at advocating for other people, because that has also kind of traditionally in the United States been the role of women to be the caretakers and the caregivers and the supporters and the cheerleaders and the mothers and the friends, and they are the ones who hold the communities together. And so we're so good at advocating for other people. But even in my personal life and my personal experience as an OT person, and the OT people that I see, they struggle advocating for themselves because they hate to inconvenience somebody, and they've been told that like they'd rather just grin and bear it because of these kinds of like societal pressures and this historical what's the word?
Precedent, like it was set before them.
Right. And so I wonder if maybe some of that has influenced our profession on a very large scale.
And I think that's why it's so important to network and find people that inspire you to do more. Like literally my friend Rachel that I rode to New Orleans with, she does so much advocacy, and she's been so involved in our state, and like she inspires me to do better and be more. Like I have so many friends like that, but I've made those friends through the state association and now through AOTA, I go every year. Like I won't miss unless something terrible happens and I can't.
Yeah.
But like I've made so many friends at these conferences that are the people that are making change. And so I just, I want other people to be inspired to get involved. Here's my soapbox again, but get involved, meet new people, network. It will make your job better if you are passionate, because it's not a job anymore. It's your profession. It's something that you care about so much. And it's why we do what we do.
And I want to, before we wrap up, because this is what happens to us. We just talk for an hour. We talk forever is what I meant to say. We just talk because we just love to talk. But one thing I do want to say, because I have been told that we are both very passionate people about OT. And I know that for some OT people, that's intimidating. Like they're like, oh my gosh, they feel insecure. I've been told that people feel insecure or feel, have a little bit of imposter syndrome, or they're like, well, like I just don't feel that. Like I'm not as passionate about it. So I feel bad. And like, maybe I should feel passionate or whatever. And what I want to tell those people, you do not have to have the same level of passion for OT that we do. We're on a podcast. So clearly we have a higher level of passion than your typical OT practitioner, because not everybody has a podcast, but you can lean on your fellow OT people. If nothing else, lean on them for support.
Yeah.
Don't, like when you're struggling with stuff or when you're needing help or when something's going on that you're like, I wish that this were different. Advocacy can be leaning on the people around you. And maybe that's all it takes. Maybe that's enough. If you're having a hard time, you don't know what to do, whether it's an intervention strategy or something about billing or something like some administrative something, lean on the people around you. If you don't know what to do in like a greater sense of like, you don't know, like you're having issues within your company and you're not feeling supported and you're not feeling heard, lean on your fellow OT people. You don't have to do it alone. We are out there and we can only do things together,
Yeah.
So you don't have to be us in order to still like
have some Come advocacy. Come join us on the rabid, passionate trail. It's a fun time.
It is fun. And it makes me more excited. It makes me even more passionate when I talk to people like Laura, because she's also, it fuels my passion. And that's one thing that I find really helpful about like being a part of groups and having OT friends, and it keeps it interesting. But again, like I said, like you don't have to be as passionate as we are in order to still feel like you're taken care of.
Yeah.
And people respect your perspective and they advocating for yourself can just be reaching out to your friend.
Yeah. Just going to say AOTA is in Philadelphia next year.
Oh, that's where it is.
I'm on the travel plan. Like AOTA is helping me see the world. It's pretty interesting. Not the world, I guess. I'd have to go to the World Federation. They just have met in the Bahamas, the World Federation.
Oh my gosh, that's so close.
So I'm like, I need to start getting they went to Paris a couple of years ago.
Girl, I got to get out of school because I'm broke.
You got to get out so we can start traveling together. But do you want me to do my win?
Oh, yes. Yeah, please.
I was going to impress Magnolia with this win because it's actually a speechy kind of thing.
Oh, I love it.
She can listen to it later.
Yes.
So I had a kiddo who had some major, I hope I'm saying the right term, but some major articulation issues in that he, when he was trying to make certain sounds, he would make sounds of other, like, and ones I had never heard before, like a K sound instead of an SL sound. So like, it was very difficult when we did his treatment, about Anna's treatment, like to understand what he was trying to talk to us. And like, he was really great at like, he would repeat it and he would use hand gestures. But like, I remember looking at, I had a student with me and I looked at her like, did you catch that? No. Did you catch that? No. And so we kind of talked about it. And then the next time I saw him, he asked me something about, use Squishmallows when I skeep. And I was like, he's talking about sleep. He's talking about sleep. I got it. And like, even though that's such a small win, but to be able to like pay attention to how he's trying to communicate, I felt so much better because I really left his eval like, oh,
Yeah.
whew. And in my head, I'm like, well, I won't be doing a whole lot of these treatments because in this setting, I do more primarily evaluations. But I got to do some treats this week. And so I was like, okay, pay attention to how he's talking and figure this out. And so sometimes and that would have been a great example if we'd had speech in this setting to be able to co-treat.
Yeah.
But being able to just really focus on how he was communicating. And he was excited when he would say something to us and we got it.
Oh, I love.
He like lit up like, they get me, they understand me.
Yeah.
We were playing this fun little game where he would jump from the trampoline into the crash pad and I'm tossing him the Squishmallow and he's catching it in the air. And, we were having this like whole moment and he was kind of upset and had been kind of upset on the unit when we got there. We have a lot of magic in our sensory room because it is really fun in there.
Oh, I love
But like him being able to talk to me about sleep and things that were, part of his day to day while we were playing. I just listened to your play episode, but like while we're having this play, we're having this he was able to communicate with me. And I thought that was a really big win.
I love that.
Yeah.
That is a great win. And that's a great example of how to use play, not necessarily in like an outpatient pediatric setting.
Yeah.
Because play is a primary occupation of kids and they be doing it anywhere and everywhere that they can.
And a lot of these kids with this, especially in this acute mental health setting, most of them have an ADHD diagnosis, and a lot of them have they've been pinned with things like ODD and, disruptive mood disorder. And it's like, but they're really they need some sensory, like they need to get some proprioceptive input for calming. And so like when they come to our room, it's like, they've gotten it,
Yeah.
and it's great.
Oh, I love that. That's a great win. I love that so much.
Yes.
I wish that you could hang out with us all the time.
I'd love to come back.
This was so much fun. We'll definitely have to have you back for
Thank you for having me.
something.
First guest,
Who
right?
knows? First guest. She's special. I mean, like I had to, I had to like the woman who started it all, started my whole OT career. I had to, have you as my first guest. I'm so excited. Yeah. So I guess we will cut back to me and Magnolia. Thanks.
Bye.
Welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed listening as much as I did. Jonathan's got a huge smile on his face because he knows we learned something.
Yeah, it just makes me happy. I just love Laura so much and we have such a good time. And she's such a wealth of knowledge for me. And so I had a wonderful time talking with my friend.
Well, thank you, Laura, for coming on the podcast. So we don't forget. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hopefully we can have her on again to learn some more stuff.
Oh, I'm sure.
Later on. She was the first guest.
First guest, which I felt was only fitting, because she's
so.
kind of where my OT career started a little bit.
So thank you for being our first guest.
Thank you, Laura. We love you. So, Magnolia, what'd you think? What'd you learn?
Let's see. I learned a lot. There's a whole lot there. I feel like I wasn't too off with where it started, but of course it didn't start just full, like medical. Like I'm picturing like hospital setting first, rehab setting. And so I really think though, I like that in the core of it, it was like there was a need and then how can we meet that need?
Yeah.
And it sounds like the OT field has like adapted to that throughout its whole history, which is kind of like the coolest part I think about OT is it seems like you're always looking for a need or looking for ways to, help people out, engage people, help them get in their environment, fill all their occupations that we learned about. Yeah. And it seems like y'all shifted a lot, but that y'all, like, that's still the core of it. And I think that's really cool.
I agree. It's one of the big things that I think is super cool about our profession too, is how we have pivoted and we have adapted and changed as the world has changed and needs have arisen. Have arisen?
Have a rose?
Arisen. A rose? I don't know.
Continue.
As needs have become apparent.
Yes.
We have, as a profession, like shifted and changed to, like you said, to meet that need.
Yeah.
And I think it's really neat. And sometimes people, like, I think sometimes it's hard for people to, like, imagine, like, what in the world is OT doing? Well, like, literally, I mean, just a conversation I had recently as I'm, like, calling around hospitals trying to look for a mental health placement for field work for my graduate program.
Yeah.
Like, I talked to a person at a mental health hospital and was like, hey, do you guys have OT services there? And they were like, no, this is the mental health hospital. Like, we don't work with people's physical conditions. And I was like, oh, okay. And so, you know, it's just an example of how people don't always, they don't realize, like, the breadth of OT because it is really big. And I think knowing some of the history kind of helps to make it make sense.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, it does make sense that OT is in schools.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it does make sense that OT is in mental health. Oh, it does make sense that OT is in hospitals and in home health and in, you know, community-based practices. And, like, so it does make sense.
It does, yeah.
When you know a little bit of the background and you know what OT actually is, like what we are at our core, because we're not just here to, like, rehab your bodies.
Right.
Like,
we're not just rehabbing hands.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, I think learning about the occupations and learning about occupational therapy last time and then now learning about the history, like, those two combined, I feel definitely helps me, like, explain OT better, helps me understand OT better. Yeah. And, like, thinking about, like, our pediatric practice, it kind of makes sense of, like, how, you know, OT truly does, like, where y'all look for the kids' needs and meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
So it's just, y'all are still keeping to the core of OT.
Yeah.
Even with kids here.
I love it. Oh, well, I'm glad that shows.
Yeah.
We're a pretty cool field.
Yeah.
We're pretty special.
They're pretty cool, but, you know, saving the best for next month.
For next month, yeah. So talk about next month a little bit.
Okay, next month we're going to learn about speech because it is Speech Month in May. Mm-hmm. It is Speech and Hearing Month. So we'll talk a little bit about both, probably more about speech, but we will talk about both. So I'm excited for those episodes.
I'm excited too. We're going to do a similar kind of thing where the plan is, anyway, to do, like, a what is speech and then the history of speech.
Right.
So that I can learn more, because I'm excited for that. Like, I'm really excited to kind of deep dive a little bit into these things and ask some questions.
I'm excited to go over it.
So it'll be cool. Okay, so to wrap up this session, do you have a therapy win of the week?
I do. So in my role as clinical director, sometimes I get pulled into sessions just to kind of, like, help out. And so, and because we're a multidisciplinary approach clinic that we work at, so I did get the opportunity to help out with a physical therapy eval the other day, just to kind of, like, help with participation levels, things like that. And so the kiddo was absolutely not wanting to get off the therapy table and just kind of having a difficult time wanting to be engaged and stuff. And so it was very much of, like, a problem solving team effort of, like, how can we get him engaged? And he was really into, I gave him a few options. He really was into the sensory brush, but not, like, for sensory brushing. He just liked the feel of it on his hands. And then we were able to get him to take that sensory brush, and there was a mirror wall in there, so I was showing him we could use the brush to clean the wall, which had him standing up. But I just really love using, like, that problem solving skills with the kiddos to help them get engaged. And that's kind of one of the great parts about, like, multidisciplinary approach. It's like we all get to put our minds together.
Yeah, I love that. So, I love, like, recognizing that kiddos, like, seeing the signs and trying to, you know, adapt and make changes to meet them where they are. Yeah,
and so, like, using my speech brain, I was just able to kind of help the PT, like, reword some of her phrases, shorten her phrases, because during that time, a lot of people don't always think about that, of, like, we need to, like, change our tone, change how we're speaking, stuff like that. So,
and say less.
Say less.
Like, that's a kind of a catchphrase a lot of time. Like, okay, say less.
Yes. Say less, but give options. And then also that pause and waiting. And giving the opportunity to see the communication. So,
I love it. That's a great win.
It was a good win.
That's a great win.
Yeah.
I was thinking about wins, and one of my kiddos that I work with, they're a kid who I see a lot for kind of more mental health things. She has a lot of, like, anxiety, and that can be limiting to her and her ability to kind of engage in some of those more social activities and social occupations. And so this, like last time I worked with her, she was talking about feeling more confident and feeling more able to kind of go about these situations and traverse these social contexts more confidently. And she was telling me, she was like, yeah, like I don't feel as stressed as I used to when I do these things. And that just made me so happy because I was like, yay, like we've been working really hard on developing some of that self-concept and self-esteem. And so it was really just kind of very validating to hear from her perspective that like she feels more empowered to go out and do these things that used to be pretty challenging for her.
Yeah.
So that was really exciting.
Yeah, that is really exciting.
I loved it a lot. So, okay.
Well, that's it.
Well, thanks for hanging out with us during OT month. Hope you guys have learned and enjoyed OT month as much as I do.
Yeah. So maybe now we can all go out and advocate a little bit. Explain what OT is.
A
little bit better.
I love it. So if you guys have any more questions, because we talked a lot about OT, but if you have any more questions about anything that we chatted about, or you want us to cover some different topics, you can contact us at the.co-treat at Instagram, or the Co-Treat Podcast, all one word, no special characters, the Co-Treat Podcast at gmail.com.
That's right.
So let us know. We want to hear. And what's your therapy win of the week?
Absolutely.
So, okay. We will see you guys in Better Speech and Hearing Month.
Yay. See you for Speech Month.
See you guys later.
Bye.